So it's great to be here, and it's wonderful to be involved with Hawkwood and the fantastic work that you do and this Centre for Future Thinking. And we need, of course, we need so much thinking, so much future thinking right now. Just before we look at what businesses can do, let's stand back yet again and have a look at this big picture. And I'll just as you've heard the context of my work. So yes, I write these books and do this work at Lancaster University, but I've been working with all kinds of different businesses who are all in their different ways, suddenly waking up, probably more than, much more than has been the case in the last, in the last couple of years, much more than they've ever done before, which is, I think, really, really heartening. And so some of what I'm going to be saying is my reflections from all of that process. Okay, just to stand right back on what's going on in the world, here's a graph of human energy use. It's been going up for millennia, but it's over the last 50 years, it's been going up at 2.4% per year. And that rate will be increasing our energy use by a factor of 10 every century. And with that energy, and with the increasing technology that we've got to go with it, we are becoming an ever more powerful species. And that process of humans getting more powerful has been going on for a long time. But back in history, we could get away with it because the planet we were on was still, broadly speaking, robust to put straight anything we did to it. But over time, that balance changed. And recently, it's really, really changed. So 100 years ago, we couldn't quite smash the whole planet up, even if we tried, and we did try quite hard. 50 years ago, or somewhere around there, we were at a point where we could smash the whole place up if we did something really stupid. Now we're at a point suddenly where unless we are so powerful that unless we are really careful, we will smash the place up. And that process of smashing the world up is currently going on at high speed. And some people use a big word for it. They say, well, humans have entered the anthropocene, the era in which we are the biggest thing affecting the ecosystem. And that's my simple little sketch for it. It's a massive, it's an enormous new change in context for humans to be operating in. We used to be able to get away with treating the world like a robust playground, and now we absolutely can't. And we've had a few decades of being in this anthropocene, but still being able to, broadly speaking, get by with doing life in a pre-Anthropocene way. So, the way that we run our societies, the way that we do economics, the way we do politics, the way we do education, the way we do business, the way we do everything has been honed in that context on the left, where we were a small species on a big planet. Now we're suddenly a huge species on a fragile, small planet. And if we don't adjust to that, then the consequences are going to hit us really hard. So it's such an interesting, incredibly significant moment for humanity. And, when I say moment, I really do mean right now, as in kind of this year, next year. This feels like the moment which if we don't wake up in the way that the science has been telling us we need to, right now, then the consequences are pretty clearly going to get very nasty indeed. So what is this this Anthropocene context? What's going on in it? So it's a whole load of interconnected things. So this is a climate lab, but just to be very clear, as Kate was earlier, climate is just one symptom of this bigger context that's going on. So we've got a biodiversity crisis going on, which doesn't get quite as much airtime, but it's just as important. We've got an ever-rising population. Whilst we've just been hearing, lots of species are in decline or going extinct, there's one species that there's more and more of every year. And we've got this beautiful world, but we're filling it up with plastics and all kinds of other pollutants as well. Somehow, whilst we deal with all these things, we've got to feed a rising population. And, there are various different ways in which we do that. But one of the things that's really clear coming out of this is when you look at the food and land system is that a lot of the pressure we're putting on the food, on the land and on the ecosystem is through the amount of meat and dairy that we're eating. And you know, that little picture of pills there just represents the antibiotics crisis that we're potentially facing, and maybe also all the other disease susceptibility that we're now encountering. And 2/3 of the world's antibiotics are currently being fed to our farm animals. And now on to climate, you know, and energy. And of course, you know, there's a lot of our world's energy supply is still coming from fossil fuels, the majority, a little bit coming from renewables, tiny bit from wind, and there's just one symptom of climate change. And then while we deal with all these kind of issues, there is the question of how we all live. So there's a rich, wealthy, broadly wealthy city for most people. A lot of people in it are wealthy anyway, that's London. And next door, there's another city that could be any one of hundreds of places in the world where the living conditions are really, really different. And if you look at, it doesn't take long looking at, for example, the climate crisis to realize that actually it gets very hard to deal with climate if you're not also dealing with inequality. A little bit more about that just in a minute. So those are some of the challenges we face. But you know, the really good news is that if we make if we take really strong action now and make a huge systemic transition, then it looks likely, it's not definite, but it looks likely that we actually have a chance to live better than ever. But it looks really clear that if we don't make the transition, it's going to get pretty grim for us. So that was my little collage of some of the presenting environmental questions we face. Here's a sketch. This is a kind of all-in-one slide summary of There's No Planet, what's going on in There's No Planet B. So around the edge in green, we've got all the kind of physical challenges: energy, climate, food, ocean acidification, disease risks, population growth, biodiversity, plastics, other pollutants. And while we deal with all that, we need to also sort out our transport systems. So that's kind of physical challenges. But the really, really good news on this is that from a science and technology perspective, you know, we've broadly got all the solutions, and I picked through this in more detail in the book. But we broadly got it all. There's a lot of devil in the detail, but you know, it's a very doable exercise. The bottleneck on this is not the science and technology. The bottleneck on it all is what it would take for humans to actually be solving these technically solvable challenges. And that takes us into, you know, closer to the kind of, you know, the heart of the issue, which is everything about how we do life. And it's, you know, given the big changing context that humanity has just undergone, it's not surprising that we find that a lot about how we do life turns out not to be fit for purpose. So let me check my slide order. Okay, so just quickly, yeah, on some of these things. So in the stuff in blue there. So first of all, growth and technology. You know, we have this, you know, with mantra about economics. I know we've heard a lot about economics just now, which was absolutely fantastic. So I won't go too much into that terrain, except to say that it's really unsurprising that an economic framework that's been honed in a totally different context turns out to be unfit for where we are now. But in terms of growth, you know, it's pretty clear that there are some things we absolutely can't carry on growing. We're still growing our carbon emissions, pandemic accepted. You know, that's clearly that can't go on anymore. We can't grow the size of the planet, even though that would be lovely if we could. We can't grow, well, there are questions about whether we can grow our energy supply. It seems to me that it's a really dangerous thing to keep doing, because it's through our energy supply that we get into all the you know, it's brought us many great things in life, but it's also brought us to the very dangerous situation we're in. And the question about technology, it seems pretty clear that we need to change our fundamental relationship with technology. So, technology has brought us to the world that we've got today with all the good things about it and all the very dangerous things about it. And going forward, we need some technologies. It's pretty clear that we need some technologies like crazy to help us find a pathway through. But it's also clear that we need to, that some technologies are going to do us more harm than good. And we need to get much more selective about when and how we adopt a technology, and asking ourselves much more carefully the question, is this technology going to be good for people and planet? And if it's not, can we find a way of leaving it on the shelf? At the moment, the way we do things is that we invent technologies because we can and because it's fun and because they give us an efficiency improvement. And we have a broadly market-based economy that where an efficiency improvement gives a competitive advantage. And so once somebody's adopted it, everybody has to adopt it because otherwise you're out of the market. And so we end up adopting whatever technology comes along, even if it's not actually good for human well-being at the end of the day or for the planet. And somehow we need to change that relationship. I just want to talk before going around the rest of the stuff in blue, those words in blue. I just want to talk a little bit about efficiency, because and all this does absolutely relate to business, because this is just one key message I want to that isn't out there widely enough. So there's this relationship between efficiency, outputs, and inputs. So if you define efficiency as the outputs you can have of anything per unit of inputs that you have to put in, we always think that if we make something more efficient, we won't have to have so many inputs anymore. So if we become more efficient with our use of energy, we won't need so much energy. Or if we become more efficient with our use of fossil fuels to create energy, we won't need so much fossil fuel. Or if we become more efficient in our use of, in our computing and our ICT, we won't, in terms of the energy per unit of output in that, we won't need so much energy going into it. And actually all these things turn out to be, that turns out to be not how it works. This is what really happens. So when you get an efficiency improvement, what happens is that the outputs end up going up even faster than the rate of efficiency inputs. And so the inputs go up a little bit as well. So this is what William Stanley Jevons noticed in the 1900s, 19th century. That was that if the UK got more efficient in its use of coal, actually it would want more coal, not less. And we see that throughout just about everything in the economy, that unless you have some sort of constraint on the inputs, actually what happens is that efficiency gains don't lead to less resource use. And so if you want efficiency to work for us, what we absolutely need to do is constrain the inputs. We need to constrain the amount of, for example, just looking at climate, we need to constrain the amount of fossil fuel coming out of the ground. And only then can efficiency gains allow us to maintain or even grow slightly our outputs if we need to. But without constraining the fossil fuel, the efficiency gains themselves won't do the faintest bit of good. In fact, you could argue quite strongly that they might even take us, they probably do take us in the wrong direction. Okay, sorry, I wanted to come back to the rest of the stuff in blue and red here. So, so the fundamental rearrangement of our relationship with technology, looking fundamentally at what it is that we can and can't grow here in the Anthropocene. So is it okay to grow biodiversity? Yes, that would be a very good thing. We're going in the wrong direction, but it would be a good thing to aspire to grow. So it's not as though all growth is bad. We just need to totally reframe what kind of growth. And the question about GDP growth, well, I think in her book, Kate Raworth puts it really nicely. She says we should be growth agnostic about GDP, because actually, you know what? GDP is just it's just a human construct. It doesn't actually relate to anything going on in the world. It's like a mathematical human invention. And we should just unfixate ourselves from it. And what we should do is we should look at the things that we need to get better at, and realign our sense of what we need to grow into. We need to grow those things that humans need to get better at. Okay, economics, we've heard about, needs a fundamental rethink, and our metrics along with it. Inequality is more important than it's ever been before. I think humans have always put up with huge levels of inequality, and for better or worse, we haven't managed to deal with that in the past. But right now, here in the Anthropocene, we're in a situation where we are, like it or not, we are actually, all 7.7 billion of us are in the same boat together, and we will sink or swim together. So unless we can create a world in which there really is a sense that all the people of the world are properly treated with respect, it's going to be very difficult to solve any of these global challenges that require global cooperation on them. Then the role of business needs a totally fundamental rework. And I love the way that Kate framed it up earlier. The purpose, the actual fundamental purpose of business needs to change. Here in the Anthropocene, it is not okay to have a business that primarily exists to make profit, with a little strapline on the side that says, but we'll do so in a way that doesn't do any harm, because the world is just too fragile for that. And if your biggest aspiration is to try not to do too much harm, you will end up doing harm, and you will end up trashing people and planet. So the fundamental purpose for a business has to be something constructive to do with people and planet, however directly or indirectly. That's why the business has to exist. And closely related to that are questions about investment. And I've been really heartened over the last couple of years at the number of talks I've given, workshops I've been at in the investment community, where they're really seriously asking questions about how can we push the trillions in the right direction now? What would it take? How can we redefine fiduciary duty so that value is not just about money, but value is about everything that matters? And can we make that serious so that an asset manager feels at risk of being sued for negligence if they're not looking after the environment properly? I won't get into politics too much, but just, it's clear that we need the best kind of politics, and as one part of that, we need absolutely truthful politicians. And then right at the center of my No Planet B summary, there are questions about values and thinking skills. And I think at the heart of the book, and it's amazing how many sort of scientists and technical experts have agreed with me in broad terms on this and come to the same conclusion, that maybe at the end of the day, there are some human values that if we can cultivate them, they will enable us to thrive. And if we can't cultivate them, then we've had it whatever we do. So that's the kind of really broad context. Now I'm going to talk just a bit more about, I'm going to get more into what this means for the businesses. And I'm going to talk, some of this is going to be quite practical, and it's going to sound quite climate related, but I want to remember as we have this, as I talk about this, I want everyone us all to have in our minds that it absolutely does not work to focus on climate as a single issue. Climate is one environmental challenge, totally inescapably interconnected with all the other environmental challenges and social challenges. But just to look at climate for a second. So one of the heartening things that's been going on has been in the last couple of years, and especially in the last year, has been this stampede for net zero. And in my business, we're getting calls all the time for companies saying we want to be net zero. How can we do it? And we spend our lives just trying to make sure that the standards of what people might mean by net zero are kept really high. So the first thing to say about it is that the priority, if you want to be net zero, has to be on cutting your carbon emissions in the first place. And when I say your carbon emissions, I mean it essentially must include all your supply chain carbon emissions. Because for most companies, that's where most of the carbon and most of the responsibility lies. So your carbon emissions need to be on a trajectory that's in line with 1.5 degrees. And then if you want to go in for some negative emissions, some carbon removals, in order to be able to make a net zero claim or a net negative claim, then they need to pass a really high standard of test for their wider environmental and social credentials. So to give an example, I'll talk about Brewdog in a second. It's a company we've been working with, and they wanted to go carbon negative, and that's what they've done. And we screened for them 65 certified nature-based carbon removals projects. And we found just 5 that we were happy with in terms of their wider environmental credentials and their social credentials and the extent to which we trusted that the carbon was actually being removed from the atmosphere. So some of the classic mistakes are, for example, planting non-native monocultures somewhere around the world, which hoovers up a lot of carbon. That's great, but it's just environmentally a disaster from the point of view of biodiversity. One example of it. And the next thing I'd want to say is that carbon cutting and carbon removal is actually just part of the response. So our work with business increasingly is we are asking, okay, so you want to do the right thing by climate. So let's have a look at what that really entails. And it entails paying attention to all the words that I had up on that collage page just now in green, blue, and red. And it entails looking at everything that this business thinks, says, and does, and asking to what extent are we contributing to the conditions under which the world can make this big systemic change. So it really affects absolutely everything about how a business works. So here's a sort of simple 7-step journey to a company that wants to be climate fit. So first of all is to understand your carbon footprint. It must include the supply chain. You'll never get a perfect understanding, but get yourself a good enough understanding. And there's, we do modeling on that, others do it too. So then cut your company's carbon footprint on a trajectory that's in line with 1.5 degrees, really steeply. Put climate consciousness into the whole company culture. So it needs to be integrated into absolutely everything. One of the biggest challenges for a company that suddenly wakes up to climate is that it takes a few actions, but actually then it's doing some good things in one hand, but in the other hand, there are whole parts of the business that haven't yet woken up to it. So that whole question of integrating it into everything. So step 4, a whole business strategy for a low carbon world, and not least including asking about the goods and services that the company produces. And Kate talked about this earlier. Are those goods and services contributing to or enabling the big global transition that we need to see? Step 6, I regard this as the most optional. If you want to take some carbon back out of the air to be carbon negative or carbon neutral, then okay. But you know what? All those nature-based solutions, it is good to fund them if they're done well, but the world needs to do those anyway, and they are absolutely not a substitute for doing the right thing within your own business. And then step 7 is to ask the really big picture questions about if we really look widely at what it takes for the world to make this sustainability transition, what would that look like? What are all the other things apart from directly just cutting the carbon that needs to take place? And how can this organization be pushing for that change to take place? So this is just a framework that we've started developing and started to use originally with asset management companies. And really heartening that they're asking this kind of question, but they're saying, well, how can we tell whether a company in our portfolio is doing the right thing by the climate agenda? And there are lots of, increasingly, there are lots of organizations looking at some of the most obvious bits, like what's their carbon footprint and what are their carbon targets. But actually to ask that question, you need to ask it much more widely. So here's our little 8 dimension framework. So we look at the carbon intensity of the business, most obviously. Next up, we look at the low carbon enablement potential of the goods and services that are offered by the business. So in other words, we're asking, in a world that's undergoing transition towards sustainability, will the goods and services that this organization is producing, will they be assisting with that or not? And also, will they be able to thrive under that transition? Next up, we've got the quality of their carbon pledges, the trajectory they're putting their emissions on, and the quality of their accounting. Really importantly, we ask searching questions about the climate narrative. So we're asking, what is this company saying about the climate emergency? Are they telling everybody at every opportunity that we have an emergency on our hands and that it is incumbent on all of us to be doing everything we can to deal with that? And what are they saying publicly, but also how coherent is that narrative? Are there any things going on behind the scenes that are, do they always tell the same story on climate narrative, or do they dress it up in one way for one group and another way for another group? Which takes me on to the next question of climate coherence, by which we look at, on the one hand, is there anything sly going on behind the scenes, like is this company funding climate denial lobby groups or something? That's at the most extreme end of it. But at the kind of more normal end of this coherence question is this point that I alluded to earlier about, to what extent has climate consciousness infused its way into absolutely everything that this business says, thinks, and does, which is a huge challenge for, as I said, for a business that wakes up to this. And then on the sort of at 9 o'clock on the dial here, the wider impact. At the moment, we've just got this in one dimension out of 8, but it unpacks a huge, it contains an awful lot of stuff. This is the one dimension in which we say, well, actually, you know what, environmentally, it's not just climate that matters. Also, there are a whole lot of social issues that are hugely important. But beyond that, if you look at everything that is necessary for the world to be able to respond properly to the climate agenda, is this company pushing for those things in all those ways? And I'll talk about that in the next slide. And then finally, climate adaptability is just about the flexibility of the company. To what extent are they responding to a changing world? So that's kind of just one way of, and we've been using this increasingly with individual organizations that come to us for advice as well. One way of framing up, how are you doing and what are your opportunities to push harder for a low carbon world? I'm just going to give one example here. I will say who it is. So this is when we analyzed Facebook. And I just want to emphasize, what we found here was that actually, their emissions intensity was fine and their carbon accounting was fine and their carbon narrative had recently become very good. And that was all fine. But if you look at the wider impact, we gave them a really, really low score. And the reason for that, and actually we also said, this is the most important one of the 8 criteria here. It's the most, if you're Facebook, actually it doesn't much matter what your carbon footprint is. What really matters is, because if we want to see a world getting on top of climate, we're going to need well-functioning democracies, and we're going to need the people of the world to be well placed to differentiate fact from fiction. And so the question is, what is this company's contribution to that? And actually, that is far more important than anything it does directly on its carbon emissions. And depending on the nature of your business, that could be the case for you as well. That it's the most important factor. Okay, I'll just talk quickly about Brewdog, because I just think they are, for us, they've been a heartening example of a company that they had dinner with David Attenborough and they read There's No Planet B and probably some other books as well. And they called us up and just said, look, we get it as an emergency. How can we do the right thing? And so we began by mapping out the carbon, step one. Step two, and this is still in process, but we are putting together a plan to cut their carbon footprint of their manufacturing, of their operations plus their supply chains by 40% in 1 year, which for a manufacturing outfit is, it's pretty eye-watering. Then they said, okay, we want to be carbon neutral. That turned into we want to be carbon negative. We ended up very carefully screening these projects. And so they're going to take twice the remaining footprint out of, or they are taking twice the remaining footprint back out of the air again. And they're just about to announce that they're buying a load of land, and we're going to have go through this process of looking incredibly carefully at exactly what is the very best thing to do with that land because all the land in the UK needs to be managed in absolutely the best way possible. And then, beyond that, there's a very full cultural immersion program going on for staff, for customers. They're really trying to engage their customers. We're talking about how can we make it so that a bar is not just a place you go for a drink, but it becomes a place where you become engaged in this whole agenda. And maybe your social life and your hobbies start to come out of this agenda as well. Or we're still imagining how this can be, but the point is, it's part of how they can exert influence. And then lastly, and especially because they're Brewdog and they're good at this thing, they have an opportunity to really communicate, really send out messages, and really embarrass anybody who is doing corporate greenwash on this agenda, because there they are, COVID hit, taking really strong action in a way that says, well, if we can do it, you know what, anyone who really gets it as a climate emergency could be doing this too. So I don't want to make them sound perfect, because nobody is, nobody should expect to be. And one of the things that we are always encouraging them and all our clients to do is, first and foremost, be really, really honest. And, do the best you can, but be really honest about, the things that are wrong, as well as the good things that you're doing. I'm going to finish up, but I've talked about how important values are, and I want to come back to them because I think they are so totally central, to have within every business and more widely within the world. And this is just my simple take on it. And I'm only putting these up, I've got no authority to talk other than from a pragmatic perspective. I think with these values, we can really thrive. Without them, we can't. The first is respect for all people around the world, giving all people equal respect as humans. The second is to extend that to the whole of the environment and all the other species that we're currently making extinct at high speed. And the third one is to respect truth, really respecting truth, however convenient or inconvenient. And I say this with kind of, I've seen so much corporate and company greenwash over the years, and we need an absolute campaign against it. So, come back to this, whatever you say about what you're doing on climate, be really, really honest about it. And if you see anybody, any politician or any business being misleading in any way on this agenda, let's just call it out so that it becomes embarrassing, really embarrassing for a business or a politician to be at all disingenuous on this agenda, because there isn't room for it. And I just want to leave with this last slide, which is to say, it's absolutely a race between tipping points. Is the environmental crisis going to get out of hand faster than we can deal with it? Or, that's on the slides on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side there, the images on the right, or the images on the left, is the very heartening evidence that humans are just beginning to seriously wake up to this agenda. And I do honestly think, although the science has got so much more scary even in the last year or two, I feel more optimistic than I used to feel, because the evidence that we are actually beginning to wake up in a serious way is so much more than it ever was. And, I don't know, I haven't got a crystal ball, but it looks to me as though if we all push really, really hard now, there is, yeah, there's probably a good chance. I couldn't say what the odds are, but you know, the harder we push, the better the chances are that we really can make this transition at long last. That's it. Thank you for listening.